The silence in the room that night was heavier than any words ever spoken. It pressed down on me, a physical weight, suffocating. My son-in-law Mark stood by the fireplace, his silhouette stark against the dying embers, his voice a low, guttural rumble that still echoed in my ears. "She has to choose, me or you." The words weren't a question, they were a decree. A cold, hard ultimatum delivered with the precision of a surgeon's cut. My daughter Sarah sat on the worn velvet armchair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders trembling. I watched her, my heart a raw, exposed nerve. How had we come to this? Just a few years ago, this house, this very room had been filled with laughter, with the scent of freshly baked cookies and the warmth of family. Now it was a battleground, and Sarah, my only child, was caught in the crossfire. I remember the day Sarah told me she was pregnant. Her eyes, usually so full of life, were clouded with a mix of fear and excitement. Mark, then just her boyfriend, had been a whirlwind of charm and ambition. He swept her off her feet, promising a life of adventure and prosperity. I saw the red flags, of course. His possessiveness, the subtle ways he'd isolate her, the way he'd dismiss her opinions with a dismissive wave of his hand. But love, or what Sarah believed was love, is a powerful blindfold. She saw a protector, a provider. I saw a man who wanted to control, to own. I tried to speak to her, gently at first, then with more urgency as their relationship deepened. "Are you truly happy, sweetheart?" I'd ask, my voice laced with concern. She'd always brush it off, attributing my worries to a mother's natural anxiety. "He just cares about me, Mom," she'd say, a forced smile on her lips. "He wants what's best for us." Their wedding was a grand affair, Mark insisting on every detail, every expense. Sarah, radiant in her white gown, looked like a princess. But even then, a flicker of something unsettling crossed her eyes when he held her hand a little too tightly, when he whispered something in her ear that made her flinch almost imperceptibly. I dismissed it as pre-wedding jitters, a mother's overactive imagination. But the jitters never truly left. They morphed into a constant hum of tension beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. The calls from Sarah became less frequent, her visits shorter. When she did come, she seemed smaller. Her vibrant energy dimmed, replaced by a quiet resignation. She'd talk about Mark's latest business venture, his demanding schedule, his expectations. Never about her own dreams, her own desires. It was always, "Mark wants this," or "Mark thinks that." My daughter, once a fierce, independent spirit, was slowly being extinguished. The grandchildren, Lily and Tom, were the only beacons of light. They brought a fleeting joy back into Sarah's eyes, a spark of the old Sarah, but even their presence became a point of contention. Mark resented the time Sarah spent with them, claiming it distracted her from her duties to him. He'd criticize her parenting, her choices, chipping away at her confidence until she doubted every decision she made. I watched helpless as my daughter became a shadow of herself. I tried to intervene, to offer support, to remind her of her strength. But Mark had built walls around her, invisible but impenetrable. He'd twist my words, portray me as a meddling mother, a threat to their perfect family unit. Sarah, caught between her husband and her mother, became increasingly withdrawn. Then came the incident with Lily's school play. Sarah had promised Lily she'd be there, had even helped her rehearse her lines for weeks. But Mark had a last-minute business dinner, and he insisted Sarah accompany him. "It's important for my career, Sarah," he'd said, his voice dripping with thinly veiled threat. "Your daughter will understand." Sarah called me, her voice choked with tears, asking me to go in her place. I went, of course, my heart aching for both my daughter and my granddaughter. Lily on stage kept scanning the audience, her little face falling when she didn't see her mother. That night, when I confronted Mark, gently at first, about the impact his demands were having on Sarah and the children, his mask slipped. The charming facade cracked, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. "You're interfering, Eleanor," he'd snarled, his eyes glinting with malice. "This is my family, my rules. Sarah knows where her loyalties lie." And then, that night, after another heated argument, after Sarah had once again tried to mediate, to appease him, he delivered his final blow. "She has to choose, me or you." The words hung in the air, a death knell for the family I once knew. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, with years of suppressed anger and resentment. Sarah's sobs were the only sound, a raw, guttural cry that tore through my very soul. I looked at Mark, his face impassive, a chilling calm in his eyes that spoke of absolute conviction. He truly believed he was in the right, that his demands were justified. that Sarah's loyalty was something to be earned through submission, not love. My mind raced, replaying every subtle manipulation, every dismissed concern, every instance where I had tried to reach out to Sarah, only to be met with a wall of fear and denial. I saw the pattern now, clear as day, a slow, insidious erosion of her spirit, orchestrated by the man she had sworn to love. He had isolated her from her friends, from her hobbies, and most painfully, from herself. I remembered a conversation with Sarah just a few months prior. She had come over for coffee, a rare visit alone, while Mark was supposedly on a business trip. Her eyes were hollow, her movements sluggish. She spoke of feeling trapped, of a constant pressure to be someone she wasn't. "He says I'm too emotional, Mom," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible. "He says I need to be stronger, more resilient. But sometimes I just feel so tired." My heart ached for her. I wanted to scoop her up, to protect her from the storm she was weathering. I told her she was strong, that her emotions were a part of her beautiful spirit, not a weakness. I urged her to consider therapy, to talk to someone, anyone, who could help her see the situation clearly. But the fear in her eyes was palpable. "He wouldn't like that," she'd said, her gaze darting towards the door as if he might suddenly appear. "He says we can handle our own problems." Mark's control wasn't just emotional. It extended to their finances, to their social life, even to the clothes Sarah wore. He'd scrutinize her appearance, making comments about her weight, her hair, her choice of attire, always under the guise of helping her look her best. He'd intercept her mail, check her phone, demand to know her whereabouts at all times. He'd even started dictating when and how often she could see me, claiming I was a negative influence. Each restriction, each criticism, was a tiny chip, slowly eroding her self-worth, making her believe that she was incapable of making her own decisions, that she needed him to guide her, to protect her from the world and from herself. He had created a cage, gilded and seemingly comfortable, but a cage nonetheless. The children, Lily and Tom, were not immune to the tension. They were bright, sensitive children, and they picked up on the strained atmosphere, the hushed arguments, the way their mother often looked sad. Lily, especially, became withdrawn, her usual bubbly personality replaced by a quiet solemnity. She'd often cling to Sarah, her small hand clutching her mother's skirt as if afraid she might disappear. Tom, the younger one, would sometimes act out, his tantrums a desperate cry for attention in a home where the emotional oxygen was being slowly depleted. I tried to be a source of stability for them, to offer them a safe haven at my house, a place where they could just be children, free from the heavy weight of their parents' conflict. But even those moments were becoming rarer, Mark's grip tightening with each passing day. I looked at Sarah again, her shoulders still shaking, her face hidden. I wanted to scream, to rage at Mark, to shake him until he understood the damage he was inflicting. But I knew that wouldn't help. It would only escalate the situation, push Sarah further into his corner. I had to be strategic, to think clearly, for Sarah's sake, for the children's sake. My voice, when it came, was surprisingly steady, though my heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs. "Mark," I said, my gaze unwavering, "this isn't about choice. This is about control. Sarah is not a possession to be claimed. She is a human being, your wife, the mother of your children. She deserves respect, not ultimatums." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise, then anger, crossing his face. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. "You don't understand, Eleanor," he sneered, his voice laced with contempt. "You're old-fashioned. This is how relationships work. Someone has to be in charge, and it's going to be me." He turned his back to me, dismissing me, his posture radiating arrogance. Sarah finally lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, but for a fleeting moment I saw a spark, a tiny flicker of defiance in their depths. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of fear and exhaustion. But I had seen it. That tiny spark was all I needed. It was a sign that the Sarah I knew, the strong, independent woman, was still in there, buried deep beneath layers of fear and manipulation. I knew then that I couldn't give up. I wouldn't. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about reclaiming her life, her spirit, her future. And I would fight for her even if it meant facing Mark's wrath head-on. The night was long, filled with the silent screams of a family tearing itself apart. The night stretched on, an eternity of tension. Mark eventually retreated to his study, leaving Sarah and me in the living room, the air still thick with the residue of his ultimatum. Sarah finally looked at me, her eyes pleading, lost. "Mom," she whispered, her voice raw. "What do I do? I can't choose. I love him, but I can't live like this anymore. But the children, what about Lily and Tom?" Her words were a desperate plea, a reflection of the impossible bind she was in. My heart broke for her. She was caught between a rock and a hard place, between the man who controlled her life and the mother who desperately wanted to free her. I knew I couldn't tell her what to do. The choice had to be hers, truly hers, for any change to be lasting. But I could offer her strength, a lifeline, a reminder of who she truly was. "Sarah," I said, my voice soft but firm, "you are not alone. Whatever you decide, I am here, always, and you are stronger than you think. You've always been. Remember when you were little, and you wanted to climb that old oak tree in the backyard? Everyone said it was too high, too dangerous. But you kept trying, scraped knees and all, until you reached the top. That's you, sweetheart. Resilient, brave. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of a smile touched her lips, quickly vanishing. It was a start, a tiny crack in the wall Mark had built around her. We talked for hours, not about Mark, not about the ultimatum, but about her dreams, her fears, her memories of a life before Mark. We talked about Lily and Tom, about their laughter, their innocence, and the future they deserved. As the first hint of dawn painted the sky outside, a fragile resolve began to form in Sarah's eyes. It wasn't a decision yet, but it was a shift, a subtle change in her posture, a flicker of the old fire returning. She was tired of being afraid, tired of being controlled, but the fear of the unknown, the fear of breaking her family apart, was still immense. Mark had made sure of that. He had systematically dismantled her support system, making her believe that he was the only one she could rely on. He had painted a picture of a world without him as a desolate, terrifying place. And now, she was standing at the precipice, looking down into that abyss. I knew Mark would not take this lying down. His ego was too fragile, his need for control too absolute. He would fight, and he would fight dirty. He would use the children. He would use their shared history. He would use every manipulation tactic in his arsenal to keep Sarah tethered to him. I had seen glimpses of his true nature before, but never so overtly. His "she has to choose" was not just about Sarah. It was about asserting his dominance, about proving that he held all the cards. He saw me as the enemy, the one trying to disrupt his carefully constructed world. And he was right. I was. For Sarah. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. The sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but the usual morning sounds, the clatter of breakfast, the children's excited chatter, were absent. I had barely slept, my mind racing, trying to anticipate Mark's next move, trying to prepare Sarah for the battle ahead. I made coffee, my hands trembling slightly. Sarah emerged from her bedroom, her eyes still red, but with a newfound stillness about her. She walked into the living room where Mark usually held court, reading his newspaper, sipping his coffee, demanding attention. But today the room was empty. My breath hitched. Only one was in the room. Was it Sarah, or had Mark? No, that couldn't be. My heart pounded. I looked at Sarah, a question in my eyes. She didn't say anything, just walked over to the armchair, the one she had sat in last night, and picked up a crumpled piece of paper from the cushion. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It was a note, written in Mark's hurried, angry scrawl. I watched her face as she read it, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she looked up at me, a strange mix of relief and sorrow in her eyes. The silence stretched, pregnant with meaning. The choice had been made not by Sarah but by Mark. He had left. The crumpled note in Sarah's hand felt like a physical manifestation of the storm that had just passed. She handed it to me, her fingers brushing mine, a fleeting touch that conveyed a lifetime of unspoken emotions. Mark's handwriting, usually so precise and controlled, was jagged, betraying a fury he had tried to suppress. The words were short, sharp, and cutting. "If you can't choose me, then I choose to leave. Don't bother looking for me, I'm done, you made your bed." There was no apology, no regret, just a cold, self-righteous declaration of abandonment. He had left, just like that. The man who had demanded absolute loyalty, who had controlled every aspect of Sarah's life, had simply walked away when he didn't get his way. A strange mix of emotions washed over me: relief, shock, and a profound sadness for the broken dream Sarah had once held. The silence in the room was no longer heavy with tension. It was vast, echoing with the sudden absence of a dominant presence. Sarah sank onto the armchair, the note still clutched in her hand, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. She wasn't crying. Not anymore. It was as if the well of her tears had run dry, leaving behind only a quiet, stunned emptiness. I sat beside her, pulling her into a gentle embrace. She leaned into me, her body trembling slightly, a fragile bird finally finding refuge after a long, terrifying flight. "He's gone, Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He actually left." There was a hint of disbelief in her tone, as if she couldn't quite comprehend that the man who had loomed so large in her life, who had dictated her every move, had simply vanished. I held her tighter, letting her feel my presence, my unwavering support. This wasn't a victory dance, it was the quiet aftermath of a war, and Sarah was a survivor, bruised but not broken. The immediate relief was immense, but I knew the true work was just beginning. The emotional scars, the years of manipulation and control, wouldn't simply disappear with Mark's departure. We spent the morning in a haze. I helped Sarah call her best friend Emily, who had always been a quiet source of support despite Mark's attempts to isolate Sarah from her. Emily arrived within minutes, her face etched with concern, but also with a fierce determination to help. Together, we started to piece together the practicalities. Mark had taken his car, a few bags, and nothing else. He hadn't even said goodbye to the children. Lily and Tom were still asleep, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their home. Sarah looked at their closed bedroom doors, a fresh wave of pain washing over her face. "How do I tell them, Mom?" she asked, her voice cracking. "How do I explain why Daddy isn't here anymore?" That was the hardest part, explaining the inexplicable to innocent minds. We decided to tell them gently, honestly, but without placing blame. We would focus on the fact that sometimes adults make choices that are hard to understand, but that both their parents loved them very much, and that they would always be safe and loved. It was a difficult conversation, filled with tears and confusion, but Lily and Tom, with their innate resilience, eventually accepted it, clinging to their mother and grandmother for comfort. Their questions were simple, heartbreaking. Will Daddy come back? Did we do something wrong? Sarah, with a strength I hadn't seen in years, reassured them, her voice steady, her eyes filled with a new resolve. As the day wore on, the reality of Mark's absence began to sink in. The house felt lighter, the air cleaner. Sarah moved with a newfound freedom, a subtle spring in her step that had been missing for so long. She opened the curtains wide, letting the sunlight flood the rooms, as if chasing away the shadows of the past. She put on music, something she hadn't done in years, and for the first time in a very long time I saw a genuine smile on her face. It was a tentative smile, still tinged with sadness, but it was there. The silence that had once been oppressive was now a canvas, waiting to be filled with new sounds, new laughter, new life. The choice had been made, not by Sarah, but for her, and in that unexpected departure a new path had opened, a path towards healing and rediscovery. The days that followed Mark's departure were a strange blend of grief and liberation. Sarah moved through them with a quiet determination, like someone emerging from a long, dark tunnel into the light. The initial shock gave way to a profound sense of relief, a lightness she hadn't realized she'd lost. The constant anxiety that had been her shadow for years began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative hope. She started making small changes, reclaiming her space, her life. She rearranged furniture, painted a wall a vibrant blue, and even started a small herb garden on the patio, things Mark would have never allowed. Each act was a quiet rebellion, a declaration of independence. The children, too, began to blossom. Lily's laughter returned, echoing through the house, and Tom's tantrums became less frequent, replaced by curious questions and playful antics. They thrived in the calmer, more loving environment, soaking up their mother's renewed attention and the unwavering presence of their grandmother. We talked openly about their feelings, about missing their father, but also about the peace that had settled over their home. Sarah made sure they understood that Mark's departure was not their fault, that sometimes adults simply couldn't live together anymore, and that love in its many forms would always be present in their lives. Sarah slowly reconnected with the world she had been forced to abandon. She started seeing Emily more often, their conversations filled with shared laughter and supportive advice. She picked up her old hobbies, dusting off her painting supplies, and rediscovering the joy of creating. She even enrolled in a few online courses, something she had always wanted to do but had been discouraged from by Mark. Her confidence, once shattered, was slowly being rebuilt, piece by painful piece. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of overwhelming sadness. The years of emotional abuse had left deep scars, and healing was a long, arduous process. But she faced each challenge with a quiet strength, knowing she was no longer alone. I watched her, my heart swelling with pride. My daughter, the vibrant, independent woman I had always known, was slowly but surely returning. She was learning to trust her own instincts again, to listen to her own voice, to make choices that were truly her own. She was rediscovering her worth not as someone's wife or mother, but as Eleanor, a complex, resilient, and beautiful human being. The ultimatum that Mark had delivered, meant to break her, had inadvertently set her free. He had forced a choice, and in his absence, Sarah had chosen herself. One evening as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Sarah and I sat on the porch swing, watching Lily and Tom play in the yard. The air was cool, peaceful. "You know, Mom," Sarah said, her voice soft. "When he said, she has to choose, me or you, I thought my world was ending. I thought I had no choice at all." She paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. "But he made the choice for me, didn't he? And in doing so, he gave me back my life." She turned to me, her eyes clear and bright, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Thank you, Mom, for everything, for not giving up on me." I squeezed her hand, a silent promise that I never would. The room, once filled with the heavy silence of an ultimatum, was now filled with the light of a new beginning, a testament to resilience, love, and the quiet power of choosing oneself. The horizon was unfolding, vast and full of possibilities, and Eleanor was ready to embrace it.